It is another episode of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng alongside my longtime partner, Brad Bierman. Thanks so much for joining us on this Monday, January 27, 2025. We've got so much to talk about as always. Let's begin today's show on the Syracuse basketball team. They were 0 for 2 last week. Brad, you were at the Clemson game covering in press row. Wasn't particularly close in a 14-point loss. Then we talked about Pitt being a barometer game. Syracuse played it close, but ultimately lost 77-73. Brad, your thoughts on a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week for the basketball team?
Well, if you don't mind, Wes, I'll throw in a personal note. Not exactly press row at Little John Coliseum in Clemson, the last row, but that's okay. Had my binoculars, focused in on the team. And early on in that game, it was just so clearly evident how Syracuse is a step slow on the entire roster, Wes. When you see up close having a chance to do that against a team like Clemson, the upper echelon of the ACC, could see that Syracuse was going to be in for a long night. Just really painstakingly familiar offensively and defensively for that matter. And it's gotten to the point where we can put to the side almost like a broken record week in and week out. See if Syracuse can play 40-minute games. The coaching staff can get them up here the rest of the way. But kind of looking at it from a historical perspective now, you mentioned the two games that Syracuse on this 2-game losing streak against Clemson and Pittsburgh, and now head to the West Coast. You'll have a chance to see them at Stanford Wednesday night and then to Cal this weekend. Two tough games. We both have to agree. Stanford's playing really well, moving up in the ACC standings. And while Cal's still kind of down a little bit, has really played a lot better basketball the last 3 weeks. And then returning home for a game against Duke. Now, if Syracuse were to lose the 3 games and have a 5-game losing streak, Wes, unprecedented in over the last 50 years. Jim Boeheim had 6 instances where there was a 4-game losing streak, and the team snapped it, including his final 2 seasons, right down to the end when they had to beat Wake Forest in that final regular season game, his last year before they lost to Wake in the ACC tournament, Boeheim's last game. And now Syracuse loses 5 games in a row this year under Red Autry in just his second year. It certainly will be historical. And we don't want to dwell on the negative, of course, because it's still time to see if the team can develop a little bit, pull off an upset here or there, and compete to try to get in the ACC tournament as one of the top 15. So I'll leave it at that point and see what happens on the West Coast trip. And I'll be eager to see your perspective when you get to see them play against the Cardinal.
Yeah, so we were talking about this in the last podcast. Again, Pitt was a game Syracuse absolutely needed to have if they wanted to stay on Mount 500. And I'm just going to go to the game itself, Brad. It starts on the defensive end, and that's nothing new. That's not anything that I haven't said or that you haven't said over the course of the season. But that 8-0 run in the second half was one Syracuse just couldn't recover from. And one stat I want to point out here is points in the paint, because Pitt outscored Syracuse 38-30 in points in the paint, and they made 15 shots from in close. I think that shows a problem that Syracuse has had all year on defense. Eddie Lampkin, of course, he had 23 rebounds. I think there's a lot of credit goes to that, but he's just not a rim protector. And I think that's a real problem. And even, okay, so Eddie Lampkin had a great rebounding day, but the lack of boxing out was really frustrating down the stretch. And it didn't come from Lampkin. It actually led Adrian Autry to call out specific players, including Chris Bell, and Bell saying after the game that Autry was right about that. So when you're playing a peer school like Pitt, it's the little things that end up hurting the bottom line. They don't have much of a margin for error. So little things like a box out here or not closing in on defense when someone gets into the paint, or the turnovers, really important also down the stretch in that doomed Syracuse.
And Wes, to your point, defense is about desire. And save for perhaps BC and Miami, I think they're all peer schools for Syracuse in the ACC. So I've come to look at it. Can they hold the respective opponents? So Stanford coming up on Wednesday night. Can they hold Stanford to under 35 points and a half in the first half to start? Under 30? That's kind of the mark I've been looking at. They've been giving up 40 or more points in halves to these other ACC teams. Not going to win, plain and simple. Even if you shoot 50 or 60%, not going to win if you don't lock down on defense.
So, Brad, we move on. While the basketball team was playing on the court, the football team was making moves in the stands. Dozens of recruits were on campus over the weekend. Syracuse landing 2 commitments: Stephen Picard, a 2026 offensive lineman from IMG Academy; Jarius Rogers, an edge from Orange Park, both in Florida. Brad, what do you think about the new commitments?
Well, I see Florida. I see defensive linemen, first of all, and that rings true. And then I see a player with Syracuse ties playing at a school in Florida, and that rings true to Fran Brown's recruiting strategy. And 15th in the country, Wes. I've just been marveling at the rivals' rankings as these kids have been coming up for the official visits. You've been talking to them. You hear all the great positive reviews of the coaching staff, of prospective teammates in the future, the facilities, academics, getting out and working in the community, all positives. And it's only going to go up. I mean, the foundation was laid here in 24, 25. Now we're moving ahead to 26. And I can't see anything but numbers going up for this recruiting class.
Yeah, so Brad, aside from the 2 commitments, there are a couple names I wanted to highlight that I spoke with over the weekend. I want to start with 2028 quarterback Anthony Smith. He's from Western Pennsylvania. He's been on the Syracuse campus for spring ball, elite camp. He took in a game in the fall. He receives an offer on the trip. That's his first collegiate offer. And he told me that he was, quote unquote, super excited for the offer, that he loves the staff and also the Syracuse campus. Great start to really get ahead of the curve on a 2028 quarterback. Another player who picked up a Syracuse offer from the Pittsburgh area, Zachary Gleason, he's a 2027 defensive back. And what did he talk to the staff about? He talked about opening a pipeline from Pittsburgh to Central New York. So you can see the staff has identified New Jersey, of course, with Fran Brown being from Camden, Elijah Robinson being from Camden, New York State, where they're situated. They managed to keep a majority of the top 2025 recruits in state. You just mentioned Florida, getting 2 commitments from there in this class. We've been talking about California, that Syracuse has been trying to establish a pipeline of Southern California. Now renewed focus on Western Pennsylvania, Syracuse starting to make inroads there as well. Brad, if they can get Pittsburgh, which is a great football town, produces a lot of great football talent, that is a really significant move for the Orange here.
Makes sense in year number 2 of full recruiting, West, because you think about it in this day and age, and you talk to the kids, you text them and message them. When they start organically reaching out and networking with one another, that creates its own path itself. And it makes total sense. We talked about from day one, 6-hour radius from Syracuse. Western Pennsylvania kind of falls into that 6-hour radius. But we're seeing these plans implemented now, just like you mentioned, not just in the Northeast, not just in the Eastern Seaboard down to Florida, but all the way out to California and Texas and other areas rich with talent. And just makes total sense, the evolution of recruiting under Fran Brown and his staff.
So we're going to take a quick break. Max Dorsey, when we return, this is the Juice on the Cuse podcast. This is the Bet Online read. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds from everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC. Bet Online is your number one betting source for the new year. Every touchdown to three-pointer and hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with the odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. Back here on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng here with you. It's a great pleasure to welcome on former Syracuse football staffer and College Football Network's Max Dorsey. Max, how's it going today? Thanks for coming on.
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, Max, appreciate the time. So we'll get you started on this one. You know, as I mentioned, you worked on the Syracuse recruiting staff for the past 4 years. And in the last year, you got to work under Fran Brown. So do you have a favorite story during that time period?
It's hard to pick one, and the entire staff was so great. I've made so many friends over there. So a lot of my favorite stories are with, the guys behind the scenes that aren't necessarily Coach Fran or at Coach Fran's level. But, as a college student taking a job like this, an internship like this, you're not really expecting to be, at the topmost level of involved. But I think it was like the second week of the second semester that Coach Fran had taken over because he came in December, and then, we hit the ground running with recruiting, a
Yeah.
couple of official visits and whatnot. But the second week of the second semester, he had asked the scouting department to pull together all of the interns just so that he could talk to us. And I think that kind of speaks to how Coach Fran likes to run a program top to bottom. He took the time out of his day to sit all of the interns down, and basically just tell us that we matter to the program, that he knows we're doing important work. And again, like as a college student, that's just like surreal to have a head coach of a college football team tell you that, what you do matters to the program. And again, I think that's just a testament to Coach Fran's character.
So we were talking pre-show, Max, and I was mentioning that I've covered Syracuse for over 20 years now, and especially in the recruiting world. And one thing that I see about recruiting as it relates to Syracuse is it's a bad recruiting footprint. New York doesn't produce athletes, or it's too cold in central New York. And we all know that Ohio State isn't exactly, Florida or California. It's a small private school that doesn't have the budget to compete. Yet you guys landed in 2024 and 2025 the two highest rated classes that Rivals has had since we started tracking you guys. So how did you guys flip the narrative in just a year, especially given all the limitations I just mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's a common misconception that New York and New Jersey and the tri-state as a whole doesn't have talent. I think people kind of underestimate just how much talent is like right in Syracuse's backyard. So I think that was Coach Fran's, approach when he got here, was to really try to emphasize recruiting the backyard. And that's exactly what he did. We got some of the top recruits in Jersey his first year here. And I think that's an emphasis that he's made. And then, he kind of spreads the whole staff across the rest of the country and tries to pick up talent anywhere. But I think his big vision, being from Camden, he knows the talent level in and around that area, was to come to Syracuse and really, really focus on recruiting our backyard.
Yeah, and I feel like because he's from Camden and because he knows talent when he sees it, again, the star system is what it is, right? And he doesn't care about your offer sheet. He doesn't care about how many stars you have, whether it's 0 or 5. He knows talent when he sees it. He's going to go after it. And I've always really appreciated that he knows what he wants and he knows the measurables. And I think that helped Syracuse go 10-3 for the first time since 2018. And as you know, it's only the third time that's happened since the turn of the century. So what was that like for you being on staff, and how was it like for you being around the staff to see something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I started my freshman year here, and I think we won, I don't remember how many games my freshman year, but it wasn't a lot. It was like 4 or 5. And then the next year we had that like 6-0 start, and that was awesome. But then we finished 6-6. And then similarly, my junior year, it was like the same story. We started, I think, 5-0 or 6-0, and then finished the season 6-6. And then to be a part of a season and a run like that, and of course, it all starts with the transfer portal and what Coach Fran was able to do there, bringing in talents like Fidel Diggs and Kyle McCord, obviously, and then also just growing the talent we already had on the roster. So to start my freshman year and be like, down in the dumps about the program, to have it, kind of track up to a 10-3 finish was an unbelievable experience. And I worked that Miami game. We had recruits at that Miami game. And it, like, the storm rush or the field rushing and all that, really was like the cherry on top of the entire season. So yeah, I mean, it was epic.
I was talking to one of the recruits who's on hand at that game, and he said, I got so into the game that I joined the field storming. And that's how much passion that even the recruits brought to that side. And one name that you mentioned that we have to talk about is Kyle McCord. And he's obviously the talk of the town in Syracuse, but he really seemed to have also improved his stock in the Shrine Bowl. And you've been around talent. You've seen talent not only at Syracuse, but on the other side of the ball. And now you have the job at the College Football Network, which we'll get into more in a second. But so talent. So where do you see him going in the NFL draft? What is a fair round for him to go in?
Well, I think it starts with what you said about his performance at the Shrine Bowl, because I was following along, and every single tweet, and it wasn't from Syracuse sources, every single tweet I saw was about how good Kyle McCord was playing. So obviously us here in the 315 already knew that. That's what we expected out of Kyle. But to see that come out kind of nationally now is very exciting. So, to me, he's a round one pick, but I'm very biased. I think he'll continue to improve his stock. I think he's going to the combine. I'm not sure on that. And then I'm pretty sure he's going to throw at the Syracuse Pro Day. So, I think the sky's the limit for Kyle. I think we'll see him go on day 2. I think that's probably fair. But again, biasly and selfishly, I would love to see him go in round 1.
So Max, we'll get you out of here on this one. Again, you're with the College Football Network now. How are you liking it? And is this the future for Max Dorsey?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I came to Syracuse to study broadcast digital journalism at Newhouse. That's what I wanted to do. And that was part of the reason I left the football program in December. Obviously, that was a hard decision because I love the whole staff. I have so many friends there. But I really wanted to pursue a career of writing and covering and talking about football for the rest of my life. So I got an opportunity to kind of get a part-time role with the College Football Network. It's a contract role, so I'm writing articles from them. It's kind of like on my schedule whenever I want to write. But I've already built some relationships over there. And if I can continue with them or, just cover football for the rest of my life, that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, Max, you did a great job here. Looking forward to seeing how your career develops. And thank you so much for everything you've done for Syracuse over time. So, Max, appreciate the time. We'll catch up soon.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you for having me.
Back to the Juice on the Cuse podcast on the Believe Network and from Rivals.com, along with my longtime colleague, Wes Cheng. I'm Brad Bierman. And Wes, I'm going to circle back to football because after all, 2025 Orange football, I don't think we can get enough news. We're so excited from how last season ended with the bowl victory and 10 wins overall and recruiting now as we just dived into. And some news on the schedule coming up here on Monday night, and I wanted to have a couple of thoughts about that. We've already learned some of the order of the schedule. We know the opponents, of course, didn't know all of the dates, but announced last week that Clemson and SMU road games will be in the first half of the season. So that's uniquely different from the last couple of years, Wes, in which Syracuse had 4 games in a row at home or 4 out of the first 5 at home, and then didn't play a home game in the month of October, and then finished up with kind of an even schedule. I'd like to really see that when the rest of the schedule is released by the ACC on Monday night. Of course, a road game at Notre Dame's to be announced. I think that'll be maybe late October, November. There are a couple of October dates it could be, but I think more like November. But one other thing I'd like to see the ACC do is split Boston College and Pittsburgh, Syracuse's annual rivals, apart so that one year you're playing BC at home, Pitt away, and vice versa. Don't like it because we see less teams coming into the Dome as the ACC has added teams. And, of course, we just finally saw Miami. So I'd like to see them switch that up a little bit, and looking forward to seeing the release of the schedule on Monday night from the conference.
Brad, it's just such a difficult schedule to navigate. And you talked about some of the teams that are going to be playing. And I've been talking about this. I've been sounding the alarm for months now. But the 4 teams that they're going to play, Tennessee, Clemson, SMU, Notre Dame, all in the college football playoff this year, and Miami, who is in contention as well. So that's a very difficult schedule to navigate. Let's see how Syracuse does that. And Brad, I want to close the show on Blaine Miller. He's going to be Syracuse's new Nichols coach. Miller hired away from Georgia where he was a defensive analyst. Now he'll get to be a position coach under Fran Brown. The 2 cross paths when Brown was the defensive backs coach there. So Fran Brown continuing to fill out his staff as he heads into the 2025 season. I think that's a great hire.
I do as well. They've really put a lot of time in the offseason to make sure that the new staff is well qualified and, the most important, of course, fits into the Fran Brown philosophy.
Dart, dart, dart. That's it for us. For Brad Bierman, this is Wes Cheng. You've been listening to the Juice on the Cuse podcast presented by Believe in Rivals, and we will see you next time.